Hello and welcome to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast, brought to you by futureofchristendom.org. My name is Chris Hume, and I have a star-studded lineup today for this episode. Calling in from across the nation, I have four guests with me. Adam Terrell from Idaho. Adam, thanks for joining the show.
Glad to be here.
Adam is the author of the book. The book's called Stoning, correct, Adam?
Public stoning.
Public Stoning. Where can people get a copy of that book?
It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you can find a book. It's probably there.
All right. So go check out Adam's book. Adam, thanks again for calling in from Idaho. And also we have Josiah Huestis all the way from Alaska. Josiah, thanks for joining the show.
My pleasure.
All right. Glad to have you here. Second time on the show, I believe, right?
Yep. It's been a couple years, but yeah.
Yeah, it's been a little while. First time guest, we have Julio Delgado. Julio, thanks for joining the show today.
Glad to be here.
And I was going to say, is that the periodic table of elements, or is that just the alphabet behind you?
I believe, no, it's just numbers. It's my wife's material to teach calendar.
Awesome. And last but not least, Luke Saint. Luke, thanks for joining the show.
Great to be here.
All right, so today we are going to be talking about immigration. Specifically, there was an episode from the Sword the Trowel podcast, that is Tom Ascol and Graham Gunden, where they were talking about immigration. Immigration, as ever, seems to be a hot button topic, especially with the recent election results, President Donald Trump securing the border, as it were, and lots of opinions on immigration, lots of thoughts. Sometimes it seems like there's not a lot of biblical thought on the topic, although in our circles, we try to ask the question and answer it to the best of our ability. What does the Bible say about all of life? And specifically as it relates to this question, what does the Bible say about immigration? So I have three clips. If you're listening to this and you haven't listened to that Sword the Trowel episode, that's fine for our listeners. I believe all five of us have at least interacted with some of these clips, listened to them. So I have three clips to play on our episode tonight, and then I want these four gentlemen, and I'll jump in as I need to interact and try to answer a few questions. What does the Bible say about immigration? Are the comments made by Tom Ascol and Graham Gunden consistent with God's law? Why are they making them if they're not? What are some challenges to think through these issues? So without further ado, let's jump in. I'm going to start off by playing the first clip. This is the longest one. And this is where Graham Gunden asks Tom Ascol if it's a sin to not follow U.S. immigration laws. This gets right to the heart of the matter. So take a listen to this clip, and then we'll start going around here and interacting with it.
Is it a sin to illegally migrate into the U.S.?
Boy, it's a crime. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think if there's any exception to the yes.
Right.
I think that, I don't know, I can't come up with a clear example, but I'm unwilling to just give a slam dunk yes, that it's always sinful. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Well, I think, there are definitely going to be exceptions that may prove the rule, and that's going to take some wisdom. But in our current, with our current laws, you might think of, as a father, husband needing to protect your family, leave the country of origin and get somewhere safe, like you have a responsibility to do that. And if you can get to America, great. Well, we do have laws, asylum laws, for instance, that people like that can take advantage of. I'm sure that there probably are exceptions, but I think generally speaking, breaking the law. I mean, are immigrant laws righteous laws? Just generally speaking. Yeah. I mean, maybe not looking at the particulars of our own.
A nation has a responsibility before God to be a nation. And I think that's where a lot of this breaks down, is we don't think like that. And in fact, I've got a little theory that will bounce off of you in a minute about that.
Well, so even thinking from the civil magistrate's perspective, what's the civil magistrate's duty? To care for, protect its citizens. Mm-hmm. Not everyone else's citizens, but its own citizens. Mm-hmm. And so in the righteous application of that duty, or execution of that duty, having proper and robust immigration laws, that is righteous. It's a righteous law. If it's a righteous law, then it's coming from God's law itself, from the eternal law. And so for us, for human beings to break righteous human laws, which are derived from God's law, well, that is sin. And so generally speaking, I think we can say, yes, to break immigration law is sin.
Yeah, but again, there are exceptions. I've just thought of one. So if you're on the Canadian-American border and there is a gang that's determined to kill you, your wife, and your children, and they're coming at you, and you've got an escape route that takes you illegally across that border.
To the U.S.
To the U.S.
Because that's where the gangs
Canada.
would be, in Canada. Okay.
Well, maybe the other way. But I mean, so is it sinful for you to do that in protecting your children? I'm hard pressed.
Yeah.
So that's an extreme case.
Well, when you cross the border line, then you declare asylum, then I think it's okay.
Well, but even that, the asylum law has been so horribly abused.
Yeah.
I'm told like 90% of the folks that apply for asylum don't get it once they finally, 2 or 3 years down the road, have their cases heard.
All right, so that was a clip from The Sword and the Trowel, and that was Graham Gunden asking Tom Askell, is it a sin to break U.S. immigration laws? Basically, is it a sin to travel? And you heard there, gentlemen, Tom Askell, he was kind of on the hot seat, and he had to think about it for a while. So I want to go around and start with that clip. Several questions were asked. Some of them were attempted. Answers were given. Are immigration laws righteous laws? What's the duty of the civil magistrate? Is it ever okay to break the immigration law? So I'm just going to start with you, Adam, and then anybody jump in here as we go. What were your thoughts on that, Adam?
I think the best analogy for our current thought process around this whole thing is sort of like we're sort of in a little bit of a Babylonian captivity. We don't get to govern ourselves any way that we want. We have to do it according to how the United States government has set it up. My understanding of what should our response be to an unbelieving ruler with an unbelieving set of laws is I believe we are bound by that as long as it's not a direct command to sin. So same thing like with the Hebrew midwives. They were explicitly, directly told to sin, and God blessed them for disobeying that and lying about their disobedience as the reasons why they disobeyed. Same thing with Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's lots of examples of clear, direct examples. The king says, commit idolatry, murder, something like that. I think in those cases you can disobey. Did an Israelite have the luxury to say, I don't think Babylon has the right to say this, do this? Even though it's not commanding me to sin, there are restrictions that are being placed on me. I think that's God put Babylon in place to sort of teach Israel their lesson of you're going to have to submit to things that are not sinful, but you've lost your freedom to do these things. So that's my perspective on it.
Okay, well, there's a lot there. I think that would take us a bit afield from the immigration, but we can definitely go there. Maybe we can come back around to that. Any other thoughts? And I'm sure some of that I'm sure you'll be able to apply it, Adam, to what we're talking about here. Any other thoughts on, let's answer Graham's question. Is it a sin to break the immigration laws? Now, I think we can all agree that we can be in situations where if we're under oppression, to use Adam's language, under captivity, there might be laws or mandates that we're kind of forced to follow, and if we break them, we might suffer the consequences. I think that's a different kind of the secondary question, but first of all, let's answer Graham's question. Is it a sin to break U.S. immigration laws? What do you think, Julio?
I think generally, yes. I'm in agreement with Adam on this. I think for the most part, when it comes to there's a couple of things. There's there's the federal government versus the American people in that sense. That even though we the people want to justify the laws from biblical understanding, there is like one big opponent against that, to the detriment of its own citizens. And so that's kind of the big thing for me, is that I'm in agreement with Adam on that one. Is that I think the position of allowing, or rather the open borders where they're able to come in and just kind of come inside I personally would feel that would be the ideal, but we're kind of living in not in an ideal situation. And so that's kind of the big thing with me is that that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay, so you would say that it's a sin, it's a violation of God's law to not follow the immigration laws.
Generally,
Josiah,
yes.
okay, and I think we'll get a chance to push back on that, I'm sure. Josiah, Luke, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I think there was something that jumped out at me right away was obviously Tom Askell was he even said he's in a bit of a pickle with that question. Um, and he goes on to say that there are potential exceptions to whether or not illegal immigration is a sin. And my first reaction was, we don't do that with any other sin. We don't look at other sin and say, oh, well, we can do it here. There's exceptions for that. So my question would have to be, how are we defining sin? How are in the clip? How are we defining sin in order to make a statement that yes, it's sin, but there are exceptions? Because it would be wild if somebody came along and said, well, adultery is sin, but there are exceptions. I believe we would all reject that. So I don't know how they would answer that in the clip, but that was the first thing that popped out at me of just like, if it's truly a sin and can be shown biblically to be a sin, there should be no exceptions.
Yeah, and one of the things I think a mischaracterization sometimes is people will push back on that, Josiah, and say, "Well, no, you guys do that all the time. You know, you say thou shalt not kill, but there are certain circumstances where killing is justifiable." And I think the biblical response is, no, the commandment is to not murder,
Yeah.
and there's never a justification for murder. There's a
Right.
justification for taking of life. They're two separate things. So yeah, I'm with you, Josiah. I want to see how this develops here. I want to get Luke in and then bat this around a little bit because I think that is at the heart of the matter. Now, Adam didn't necessarily answer it explicitly, so we'll get a chance to come back to him. But Luke, respond to that question of is it a sin to not follow the U.S. immigration laws?
I don't think so because uh, we the magistrate's responsibility is to not tell us what's a sin and what is not. They're supposed to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. That's what they're supposed to do. They don't get to define who does evil. That's not their responsibility. They don't tell us, okay, new rule, it's now evil to do X. It wasn't before yesterday, but we passed a law saying it is. That's not the responsibility. Their responsibility is when people go to them and say, give me justice, they give justice. That's the responsibility of the magistrate. It's a God-given responsibility of the magistrate. I don't subscribe to the idea of, Adam set a context for his understanding, and that was very helpful. Thanks, Adam, for your understanding of the argument. I do not subscribe to we need to follow the magistrate unless he's directly asking us to sin and going to Adam's example, because that's what I think a lot of this argument is going to come down to. That it's wrong because the civil magistrate says it's wrong, and I don't want to. Excuse me. Forgive me if I strawman anyone there, but going back to Adam's example of Babylon, from what I understand, it is not a sin to not pray to God 3 times a day. But when they passed that law, saying that if anyone prays to God, Daniel could have closed his windows. He just could have closed his windows and not let anyone know that he was praying. But what he did was when he heard it, he went back up there, he opened the windows again, and he said, I'm praying. Now, they weren't asking him to sin by telling him not to pray 3 times a day. He could have just kept the windows closed and prayed, and everything would have been fine. But that was a public declaration that just because you say that I'm not allowed to pray publicly to God, if he didn't pray publicly 3 times a day, he wouldn't be in sin. They're not asking him to sin if he would have just closed the windows, right? So, that example and several others are what I go to for when I say that just because the civil magistrate violates his responsibility by telling me, here's what we think is wrong now, it doesn't mean that I'm sinning before God. God's not going to pull out, the the code book of America of 2025 that changes every year and say, after he's done judging me by his law, he's not going to pull out American law and start judging me by that. If I don't pay my taxes the way that the government says, he's not going to pull out the IRS textbook and say, well, here's all the taxes you missed. And here's where you didn't, do this thing according to man's law. I don't think he judges us by man's law. He judges us how we treat people. He judges us how we treat the magistrate. But we break laws all the time. We're probably breaking a law right now. And I do not think that we should live. James says in chapter 2, I think, that we should live like we're going to be judged by the law of liberty. And we should not live like we're going to be judged by man's law. So no, I don't think it's a sin to cross a political border without checking with the magistrate or asking the magistrate first.
I want to let anybody respond to that. I just want to follow up a little bit. And even in that clip with Askell and Gunden, you saw that there was somewhat of a category that both of them kind of allowed for. They said, well, generally speaking, it's a sin. But in this case, they gave an example of having to leave a nation for the sake of your family, for the sake of maybe there's a threat to the physical safety of your family. But how would that not also apply, as I'm thinking about that, how would that not also apply to the idea that I have a responsibility to my family to provide for them? And is it Graham Gunden and Tom Askell that are going to be the ones making the judgment? Well, this family here, they were justified to cross the border because they were living in this regime, but this family here is not justified because they weren't. The regime they're living under isn't as bad. I think that becomes very arbitrary once you've removed once you've changed the function of the civil government from punishing evil to something else, which I do want to bring that up as well. But before we move on to his comment about the duty of the civil magistrate, any pushback from any one of you? Each one of you had a chance there to give your initial reaction to that clip. Anybody want to push back on anyone regarding whether it's a sin to migrate to America without getting the correct paperwork?
I think his intuition was correct. There is a law that says that if a slave escapes from his master to you, you're not supposed to send him back to his master. And I would presume if they come after him, then you're basically supposed to defend him. He didn't bring that passage up specifically, but there is a specific example there of, this person is a slave. Now you're actually obligated to defend him or not, at least not send him back, versus somebody who is a slave who enters the land, who's not an escaped runaway slave. You are allowed to send him back to his master because he's there on business. He's not there because he's trying to escape something.
Okay. Any response to that, Luke or Josiah?
I'm not really sure I understand what you're saying there, Adam. Can you flesh that out a little bit more?
I'm trying to remember the reference. There's a law that says if a slave escapes from his master to you, you're not supposed to return him back.
Yeah, Deuteronomy.
So in that sense, that's sort of an asylum kind of situation. And even the law is specifically talking about the horns of the altar.
Oh, yes. Okay, I see what you're saying about. Okay, right.
So the conditions that the person is escaping from making some kind of difference as to whether or not you kick him back or you hang on to him.
Right. Okay. Right. All right. That makes sense. I think everybody has the right to dominion, and if I decide I want to take dominion in this country, I don't think it's the civil magistrate's responsibility to tell me no, you can't. No, you can't do it here. If I want to buy, if Josiah is in Alaska, or let's go with Canada, and he says, Luke, do you want to buy this piece of land from me? And I say, yes, I do. Technically, you are in Canada, right? 120 years ago, we were in Canada, right? No, Russia. And he's up there, and he says, you want to buy this piece of land? And I say, yeah. I'm like wondering, how does the civil magistrate come into this at all? At what point do they step in and say, okay, wait a sec, we need some questions answered first? If I decide to sell a piece of land to somebody from Zimbabwe, India, I don't care where it's from, that's between me and that person. I'm wondering where the civil magistrate has authority to step in here and say, oh, hold on a second, you didn't ask me first. And I'm wondering how in the world did we get that?
It's the situation of, Babylon stepping in because Israel has been being evil. And so now God's taking their freedom away. Not to say that Babylon is nice and kind and wonderful and righteous. I think that's God's way of saying, Babylon is more righteous than you, Israel, which is why I'm stripping your freedom away and giving the control of it to Babylon. Then he punishes Babylon for their wicked treatment of the Jews. It
But
was
that's
it
yeah.
was evil that was coming out of Babylon's heart, which is why they treated the Jews like this. So obviously God holds them accountable to that and brings in the Persians literally at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign.
But it seems
So
like
it was short-lived.
it seems like you're saying two different things there, though, Adam. You're saying this is what's happening providentially, and it is a wickedness or an injustice, which is kind of the point we're trying to discuss. So I don't think any of us, at least speaking for myself, and I don't think Luke would disagree, that we would say having all these rules and regulations and punishments for X, Y, or Z is certainly a judgment of God. It's a wicked regime, but we're trying to answer the question of, is it in fact wicked? I think most people are saying no, it's not. It's not wrong. This is not a case of tyranny or being under judgment. This is what governments are supposed to do. And I'll bring up the quote that Gunden said in the clip. He said, "What's the duty of the civil magistrate?" He said it's to care for and to protect the people. I would certainly disagree with that. Now, and so he's not. Gunden and Askell aren't framing it. And hey, this is just a judgment we're living under, and we kind of have to, take it on the chin. They're saying, hey, the government's job is to keep people out of this nation if they don't check certain boxes.
Right.
So,
And I would
yeah.
definitely agree. I would disagree with them saying that, no, this is the government's job and this is actually the ideal situation we should be living. We should, you know, be happy to be living under rather than this is God's judgment against us. And God has asked us to submit to evil people for a time to sort of learn our lesson, so to speak. So they definitely don't frame it that way. I think I just end up either in their same conclusion or adjacent to it. But they're coming at it from well, it's the government's job to do that. And I'm saying, no, I think that's a freedom that's been stripped away that I would ideally like to have back. But I understand that God has providentially stripped it away for the time.
So if it's a freedom, I think of Paul, saying if you can get your freedom, all the more use it. So when it's framed, though, if it's a sin, according to what you're saying, Adam, I mean, would it be correct to say that, hey, if there's someone that they can make it across that border and they know that they can get their freedom, even if they're defying these laws on the books, would it be sinful of them? Would they be disobeying God to cross that border and come in and serve their neighbor?
There's two questions. There's what does it look like from the outside, and I think there's also an intent on the part of the people. There were German immigrants, I believe. They wanted to homeschool their children. Obviously, that's against the law in Germany. So they came to the United States and basically asked for forgiveness rather than permission, sort of deal. And they were granted asylum, thankfully. And I would say, I think their motivations for wanting to come here and sort of leave themselves up to the mercy of whatever judges, I think they had good, righteous motivation for wanting to break immigration law, and I would be fully supportive of them wanting to do it for that purpose. Versus somebody who's going to come here and their intent is to murder somebody, so they're already violating United States law from the outside, and they have a wicked intent. I think the grace of whether you're allowed to do that depends on what's your motivation for wanting to do it. Are you doing it out of trying to protect your family, trying to protect others and do the right thing? I
How would
would
the
say,
United States law
yeah.
stop? Sorry, Adam. How would the United States law stop somebody who has intent to murder somebody over here? How would they figure that out and stop that from happening?
I would presume after the person's killed somebody, then they would find out what their reasons were.
Oh, okay. All right, all right. Well, I'm just wondering, like, I mean, because there's somebody who's coming over here for good reasons and some coming over here for bad reasons, but no matter what law is passed on the books, it's kind of irrelevant what their reasons are because we'll never know.
A good chunk of the time, I would agree with that. Yeah.
If I may
There's a
jump in real quick. Um, it sounds, if I'm understanding you correctly, Adam, and again, I don't want to twist anything you're saying, but you're making a differentiation between what is, like what our current situation is right now, where we find ourselves, and similar to where the Israelites found themselves in captivity to Babylon, a distinction between what is and what ought to be. Like there's a difference between where we find ourselves politically now versus what we see in scripture as the optimum experience.
Right.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, when Israel was in Babylon, their goal was, okay, God said we have to submit for 70 years and then we'll get the freedom to be given back our own land and we'll get to govern ourselves again. For the time being, we don't. God's going to punish Babylon for every way they treat us badly, but God will look favorably on us for having to submit to wickedness without sinning, without committing idolatry, things like that. But if they assign me a job to go build this house over here, and I don't think that's a good business idea, I don't have the liberty to say no. I have to go do whatever Babylon tells me.
What if it's an abortion clinic?
Then you would have to say no. I'm going to defy that.
Okay.
Julio, you want any thoughts on that? Before we move on, I just want to spend a
Yeah.
little more time there.
Yeah. So the if you want to make it a little bit contextual, I mean, I think the big thing with the United States is that it's a to me it seems like a little bit of a disservice to one the American people, two the foreigner who's wanting to come inside the country. Um, in this context, I would say the from the southern border, the foreigner has, or at least the ones that are coming in, don't have a understanding of what English is or refusing to learn about English. And so they're coming into a Western mindset of how everything is run. There's this sense of a particular philosophical understanding of how culture is ran in the United States. And so just dropping someone off from this country into this other country, there is that, like what I've been saying, is that disservice to that foreigner because they can't quite understand fully how to be assimilated into culture. And
That's one of
so,
the reasons I'm not jumping at the bit to go to Iran knowing nothing about the culture. You know,
right, right,
am I going to get arrested for shaking somebody with my left hand or things like that?
right.
Things that I would be completely unaware of that might be really, really serious no-nos.
Or for example, like I've seen a lot of on Twitter, like a lot of Indians that are coming over to European countries and don't know how to use the restroom in private, and so things like that, they don't quite understand how to implement, how to assimilate into the culture that they are residing in, and so they think it's very normal, and it's really
They might go in the wrong bathroom, right? We
right,
don't
or
have
just not go in the bathroom.
we don't have that problem with Americans, do we? I'm being
But yeah,
facetious.
but there's like every country has its own ethos, right? Like it has its own way of functioning, has its own way of understanding. So like I view nations very much familial. There was I forget his name, Grandum. Is that the guy?
Graham
Um,
Gunden.
Grant Gundam, yeah. He made a really good point saying that nations are very much a particular pace of particular people with a specific language. I don't know if he goes that far as to say specific language, but a specific culture, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can't just pick up someone from one country and put it into another and hope the best. There has to be some type of understanding language-wise, but it's also easier for other countries, like for example, Britons would be a lot easier to assimilate into the United States culture. One, because they understand English, they understand the Western philosophy of how culture is ran. So there's that sense of it'd be easier for them to come inside the United States than it would be someone who doesn't know English or who doesn't want to speak English and things like that.
Well, I personally think we're still kind of missing the point, or at least, I mean, I'm partial, I guess, obviously, to Luke and Josiah, probably on this issue here, because everything you're saying, Julio, I mean, I can certainly agree with that.
Mhm.
There's certain things uh, in a nation that you need assimilation, but
Yeah.
the question is that by the force of law in terms of who can come into the nation, or is that established one by the culture, regardless of the law, and then two, when it comes to the law and the force of the sword, that you actually are punishing people for evil acts as they're laid out in Scripture. If you had that, I would submit that the people that would come here would not be a problem.
Yeah.
People aren't crawling over each other to migrate to Iran, right?
Right.
But they are to America, and historically the reason is because this is a land of great opportunity. Now, when you add the welfare state, that makes things a bit different,
Yep.
but that still doesn't go to the issue of we're trying to answer the question is it sin for someone to migrate to another nation simply because the nation there's some law that was passed by legislators that said you can't come here,
Yeah.
and I'm not hearing an argument for that. I'm
Yeah.
hearing
So I
I'm
think
hearing. Go ahead.
I think I would say that that in the similar fashion that I said, where a family or a nation is but a group of families, how families interact with each other determines that. So, like say for example, it's 8:56 p.m. I'm not going to allow any of my friends or strangers to come inside my home, and so I do view that corollary between the two, and so. There are certain time frames where I would say I'm pretty acceptable with saying making that corollary between the two and saying there is a certain way since this is my house, I'm going to allow only certain people to come inside my home, and that can be exponential to the nation itself. So the ones who are in the civil magistrate can look at who's the neighboring nations and make a determination, is this wise to bond with these people? Are they assimilating with our culture? Are they respecting of our culture? If they are, then allow them to come in and allow them to understand. But if they want, they don't want to speak their language. If they don't want to understand the culture, if they just want to abuse the system, which I know all of us are against the welfare state. I'm pretty big on ending birthright citizenship as well. There needs to be a decent discouragement of people from foreigners wanting to come into the United States to kind of leech off of that. And so I do view that corollary between the how you govern a home versus how you govern a nation in that regard.
The difficulty
Well,
with that comes when you think of the country as like a collective ownership of property. People don't typically love this example, but I'll bring it up. Let's say you live on the border,
Mm.
and so somebody can come to your house without entering anybody else's property. Are you allowed to? The United States government said you're not allowed to allow them into your house, even though they don't have to cross anybody else's property line to get there. I view
Mm.
that as kind of weird. And,
Mm.
you
To be
know,
fair, to kind of lay my cards down on the table, like I've been really, really enjoying the thoughts of a monarchy, and so I do view it more along the lines of that, in that sense, where the king can say, "Hey, these people are, generally speaking, committing more crimes in this nation, are generally abusing our systems that we have in place. I'm going to take a wisdom and say, I'm going to use my wisdom and say, I'm not going to allow these people to, for a momentary time period, to not enter into the country until they understand that they are not going to abuse our laws, abuse our culture, and things that are implemented." So, for example, I think the big thing with or not the big thing. So I have a really big problem with APAC. So it is a foreign governmental agency that kind of lobbies for just pro-Israel laws, and they're not even on record to being a kind of a foreign agent. And so, um, if we want to get to the point where we can allow people to enter into this country, they're kind of a big enemy to help flourish this series of open borderness, because they're actually denigrating our own society. for the benefit of Israel. And so
All right,
that's kind of a,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, you can finish your thought. You brought up a lot there. There's a lot I'd like to say in
Yeah, yeah.
response, but first I want to let Luke or Josiah jump in there.
I'm hearing, problems of inconvenience, but I'm not really hearing like sin. I still don't know where sin comes into play. When, I mean, we all know that the nation is not the home of the magistrate. This is not the government's home. They don't get to make rules about who comes in and who does not come in. That's completely outside of their jurisdiction. Because we all know for every bad person who wants to come in, there's just as many bad people born here. So we have bad people on both sides of the border. We have rapists on both sides of the border. We have people who hate our culture and want to destroy our culture on both sides of the border. And I think it's irrelevant to the argument to say, well, there's people who want to come in and destroy our culture. And I'm like, my question is, well, what about the Black Lives Matter riots? That was open invitation of destruction of our culture by the citizens. And I'm kind of like, why are we worried about people trying to come in and destroy our culture when we can't do it fast enough ourselves? And we don't punish those people who try to destroy our culture. We just let them live here. In fact, we give them more tax money. But we're worried about people trying to come in here and destroy our culture. And I think that's such a red herring, in my opinion, because we send our children to public school to learn how to destroy our culture. Yeah. And every A that they get on their schoolwork it teaches them how to destroy our culture more effectively. And we're worried about people who come across the border who know what a man and a woman are. At least they know what a man and a woman are. The people we hear that we educate, they don't know which bathroom to use. They're all worried about it. It's us with furries. And I'm not saying that we're worse than them or they're worse than us. But the whole thing, well, there's bad people trying to get in. I'm like, what are we doing with the bad people that are here and thriving and destroying our country right now?
So for us,
I think who we're targeting is sort of off by 90 degrees. It's like, these are the people that we want. These are the people we don't want. Right now, we're like, if you're inside the country, we like you. And if you're outside, we don't. I think, shift at 90 degrees.
I think that there's something that I'm kind of an angle here that it's worth mentioning. If we have a large group of people who are entering the nation and breaking our laws and causing chaos and bloodshed or whatever else it might be, is the solution to restrict the crossing of the border, the immigration, or is the solution to enforce biblical law?
Amen.
That to me is the question, because if we have people coming in and committing murder, let's say, we need to be enforcing the biblical punishment for murder. And I don't believe that we would have to do that very often before people got the idea.
Yeah, I think that's the ideal situation we should strive for. That's what you had in the early days of America before before the concept of a passport really existed as like a national standard.
Yep.
You had people wanting to come to the United States because there was opportunity. Yeah. And they like the way that we do things better. So in that sense, it's sort of opening up what country you want to live in to the free market. And, the best one grows and the bad ones die off.
Yeah. I think what Josiah is saying is we should be enacting biblical law. But the big enemy that is against us is those who are in government. There are very, very few people who are in government that are actually attempting to do any inkling of that in and of itself. And so there's the enemies that are coming in from the southern border, but there's also the enemy within that Luke was saying. It's like, why are we wanting to stop them from coming in when we don't even have ourselves? But the issue is, pragmatically speaking, I'm going to need to defend myself from people who are coming in, and then let me have the chance to breathe and have the chance to be able to sanctify my own people. So I think that's that twofold problem right there that needs to be addressed as well. Is that needs to be implemented.
I don't think we should do evil that good may come, though. It's not our responsibility.
Well, I don't view it as evil.
Well, to enforce laws, we're punishing people who aren't doing anything evil is wicked. If we're going to be punishing people and restricting their movement when they're not doing anything wrong, that's wicked. Can we agree?
Say it one more time.
If we're going to be punishing people and restricting their movement when they're not doing anything wrong, that's wicked. Can we agree?
Yes.
And that's why I'm against immigration law as it's understood today. Because what I believe is that God's law, the way it is now, when we institute God's law and we punish real wickedness, if people come in here and they start stealing, murdering, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. When they start doing that, we punish what the Bible says is wrong, rather than say, you know what, let's go outside the law. Let's build a hedge around the law, which I believe is happening. Just like the Pharisees, you keep creating law until you start punishing people who don't do anything wrong. People who take 501 steps on the Sabbath, right, instead of taking 500. Now we punish them in the name of trying to do something good and building a hedge around the law, which I understand why they did it. But they built a hedge around the law and they started teaching as commands the doctrines of men. And they started adding to the law in such that they started punishing people who weren't doing anything wrong in the name of protecting people from breaking the law. Obviously, we don't want people coming in here breaking the law. We don't want bad people coming in here.
Yeah.
But when we start to extend legislation past what God has said, the limits of what God has said for the magistrate to do, we start inevitably punishing people who want to do something good. And if they want to come over here and live, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And so we shouldn't be punishing them, picking them up, taking them off, putting them somewhere else, denying them access, making them answer questions that are arbitrary, that are given by, pagan baby murdering government. Like they would know what a good person is. They have no idea what a good person is. They wouldn't know a person who's allowed to live in this country if that person came in and smacked him in the face. They have no idea what a good person is, and we want these people to be vetting people. Like you should come in and you shouldn't. As far as I know, those Haitians that were eating the cats and all that kind of stuff, they were brought in by our own stinking government.
Yes.
And we want these same people to be vetting people. Like you come in, you can't. So the whole system of vetting people to come into a nation by the civil magistrate, I think it should be done by you and me, Julio. I think you and I are the ones. I think you and I are the ones that when we see somebody doing something wrong, God's system gives you and me the power to do something about it and the authority to do something about it. And you and I will always be able to regulate immigrants better than the civil government. And that's why I think it's evil, because they're punishing people who aren't doing anything wrong.
I did want to. I listened to your debate with, I think, Alan Miracle.
Yeah, it was.
I think that's. I think you at one point mentioned it. Maybe you didn't. I'm not entirely sure. How did you reconcile Exodus 23:32, 33? They shall not dwell in your land lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you.
Yes.
How I guess my question is, if there's people there, and they're being quote unquote deported, in a manner of speaking, I'm assuming by the those in authority, if they're being kicked out, or go ahead.
I don't think they were being. I don't think they were being deported by this civil magistrate. I think that was the result. Okay. They saw, again, you saw Rahab saying, we know you guys are coming in here to kill basically everyone, right? So they got the message that Israel was there to clean out the nation. I think a lot of people left. I think a lot of people got out of Dodge, and in that way they were deported naturally.
Yeah.
I don't think the Israelites were taking them and placing them on the other side of the border and saying, you can't come back here. I think they were chasing them. I think the Israelites, when they were being faithful, they were chasing them to kill them, not chasing them to pick them up and deport them.
Yeah, this was all war based.
This was war based, and it's the only time the Bible recognized a crime of status. To be a Canaanite was to be a crime. That was a death sentence. To be a Canaanite, it's the only time the Bible ever recognized the status of crime, a crime of status. After that, there is no crime of status. You can go around in biblical law and say, I'm a pedophile, I'm an adulterer, I'm a murderer, and nothing really happens to you. Because after that, every charge is established by that testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So when you look at Exodus 23, I do think deportation and banishment was happening, but I think it was happening not necessarily by the civil magistrate picking up people and placing them on the opposite side of a border. They were killing everybody inside these cities. And so I think people got out of Dodge. And then that way they were banished.
So what's your reasoning that it wasn't the civil magistrate? I mean, obviously the people were doing it themselves as well.
I'm saying I don't think it happened like in a court proceeding where the civil magistrate was like, I banish you, and then now grab them and pick them up, put on the other side of the border. I don't think that's what was happening. We see no instances of it happening. I think that Israelites literally chased them out of the city, out of the country, chased them on the other side of the border, and then they stopped chasing them. But if they caught them, they would not have grabbed them and then put them on the other side of the border. If they caught them, they would have killed them. And so there's a natural banishment, just like again in 1 Kings 15 when it talks about Asa banishing the Sodomites, or sometimes they use exterminate, but that word is some ambiguous on exactly what happened. But I think the result was banishment of the Sodomites, of the cult Sodomites. I think that he was putting them to death lawfully, but I do think the majority of them saw what was happening and they got out of there. And I think that's what happened with the Canaanites. Those ones that stayed and tried to fight, they were going to die. None of them got deported by Israel as a matter of punishment. They all deported themselves. That's what I believe happened.
And I think that's what would happen today if we somehow manage to implement biblical law in our nation. There are a lot of people who would suddenly want to be able to get out of our country.
It's happening right now with Trump.
Yeah.
Some people are already leaving, I mean, it's a few of them, and most of them
People leave California just because they don't like the taxes. What if we started, killing certain people who do certain things? I think that'd be a pretty strong incentive to leave.
Yes, the wicked flee when none pursue.
So I think that's helpful. We got some more stuff to interact with. I think that's very helpful. I mean, I would say that I understand the mindset of, well, we need to potentially, quote unquote, stop the bleeding and get things in order. But to Luke's point, I'm of the same mind that when we try to solve problems by adding to God's law, we end up harming the righteous. And back to Adam's point, I was going to mention this when Julio was commenting on the nation kind of as the home of the magistrate, as Luke kind of remonstrated against. To Adam's point and to that point, I mean, what if I want the Mexican to come over to my house so that he can serve my family? What if I need that medical treatment? What if I need him to mow my lawn, right? And that goes to Luke's point that the people are responsible. And if you have a just society, you do have a vetting, you do have assimilation, but it's not by the force of law. And I've made this point that one of the main reasons we have such a problem with the language issue, why is it that we have people coming over to America and not learning English? I'll tell you why. It's because of legislation. There's laws that have been passed that say you have to provide these services in the native speaker's language. So it's not biblical law that's causing that problem. It's man-made law. And then we say, well, we need more law to solve that problem. And then we get into disaster when we keep doing that. Let me play this short clip, 45 seconds, and then we'll interact some more.
In this realm where we are citizens of an earthly nation as well, we need to recognize that God has ordained that nation, and that nation has responsibilities to promote what is good, to punish what is evil, and to have laws, and laws that are not unjust. We need to treat them lawfully. It's what the Confession of Faith says, 1689, about all lawful laws, laws that are righteous laws, we're obligated to submit to.
And many of the immigration laws are righteous laws.
Yeah, and some of them at least are unrighteous because they are self-contradictory. If you try to obey them all, you can't.
Well, I think Tom Askell there again, I think he has an impossible task of trying to say that most of the time it's sinful to disobey the immigration laws, but when you break one that's not lawful, then you're good to go. And I don't think he can successfully defend that. And so I'd like to see if anybody here, I mean, what's Tom Askell's standard for determining whether or not an immigration law is just?
Doesn't sound like he's thought about it too deeply to me. Um, in those clips, he might have in the longer full episode cited some kind of either biblical principle of immigration or straight up law for or against immigration. I don't I haven't heard that yet in any of these clips, at least. I would assume that they didn't get into that. Or at least that's not might not even be their basis for how you determine those things today.
It's surprising, Adam, that he paused so long when he said, "Do you think it's a sin?" And for someone who's doing a podcast on it, you just say, "Okay, hold on, hold a sec, wait a second, wait a minute, wait." It's like, dude, you knew
He said he
you
was trying to avoid just a blanket yes.
Yeah, I know, but I would have thought you would have had like the answer handy, and it's okay that you don't, do or do not provide a blanket yes or no. But to your point, you said it looks like he hasn't thought very deeply about this, and that to me was like a case in point. Like, well, you really haven't thought about this, have you? And it's
Well,
surprising.
he almost takes away what he gives you, and he's like, "Oh, there's exceptions, and if people need to cross the border to protect their families." He starts giving. He even, I don't know. I think we're going to get to it a little bit later, but he talks about how his church had people who helped some other people get out of a restrictive nation,
Right.
and so he like gives all of this to us, and then he reaches out and kind of just takes it away and says, "But it's a crime, and so we can't, we really have to obey the civil magistrate." And so it's this little bit of back and forth. It's like he almost gets there, but he can't allow himself to go to the logical conclusion of it.
Well, it seems to me like there's from the judicial standpoint, there's partiality in his position, not necessarily as a person. Although I will say, when we get to that clip, if we get to it, what they're doing is they're saying you're right, Josiah. He talks about, I think, Cuba. There was a guy trying to escape Cuba, and they're saying, well, as a church, we're going to help him do that, even if it's in violation of Cuba's laws, maybe not America's, but whatever. We're gonna do this because we are partial to this guy. We're partial to him because maybe he's a Christian, and that's okay when it comes to us taking dominion. We can be partial, and we are called to be partial to fellow Christians, right? We should seek to do good, especially to those of the household of faith. And we're to be partial to our own family. He who doesn't care for his own is worse than an infidel. So we're to be partial to our family and to believers, but not when it comes to justice. We're not to be partial when it comes to justice. We're to be impartial. And so that's where I think, yeah, if we want justice, we do want justice for all. That's a biblical concept that America borrowed from the Christian worldview. We want justice for all, but we are going to be partial in our love. But if we have the freedom as the righteous to show that partiality, then we can make America a welcoming place for the righteous. Neither myself, none of us here want evil, wicked people. I don't want practicing Muslims in America. So our position is not, hey, let's have all these people come over here and practice evil. It's let's make this a place where the righteous can flourish, and those that are willing to submit to those laws can come and learn and hear the gospel. So I think that's an important point. Any comments on that clip or any of those any comments related to that idea of partiality?
But people talk about vetting, and some people bring up oaths and things like that. What doesn't make sense to me is having people come from different nations and making them swear or, in my opinion, jump through certain hoops that we don't require of our own citizens. I mean, we think we would be angry if the government rolled out a plan and said to everyone, okay, listen, if you want to live in America, everyone, including the citizens, has to swear an oath, or you have to say the Pledge of Allegiance or what have you. And I think most people in this room reject the Pledge of Allegiance because we're like, why would we do that? And I'm wondering why Americans want foreigners to do what even we don't want to do. We don't want to pledge allegiance to America. We don't want to swear allegiance or fealty to America. We think that's ridiculous. And if the government came around to us and said, if you want to live here, you have to swear. I've seen some of the swearing in. If I just recently watched a documentary where a skater from ice skater from Russia swore in to become a citizen of Australia, and it was, I promise to uphold the Australian values. I promise to follow their laws. Australia is the best country in the world, basically. And I was like, this is just a horrible thing to ask of anybody, to do something so asinine as swear allegiance to these horrible laws of Australia, these baby murderers. And I don't know why Americans would want foreigners to swear allegiance to this nation, as wicked as we are. But let's say we are even righteous. I still wouldn't swear allegiance to America, even if it was the best nation in the world. We're not supposed to swear allegiance to anyone except Christ. We're ambassadors of Christ, not ambassadors of America. And I mean, if we're going to have one law for the immigrant and for the native, we don't make the native swear anything. We think it's ridiculous. Why would I make the immigrant swear anything? And just to hammer that point home, I recently read a book. I recently read a book about a man named Jack Hinson. It was called Jack Hinson's One Man's War, and it was about a man who supported the Union, but in the Civil War. But then the Union killed his sons, and it basically did a patriot thing with Mel Gibson. Basically that's the storyline, and he starts attacking the Union as a one-man sniper. But in that book, they detail General Grant's frustration that when the Union took over, when the North took over a certain town, they would make everyone swear fealty that they were going to be nice and not cause problems. They, if you're going to stay in your house, we'll leave you alone as long as you swear to be nice and to promise to not harass us and to be faithful and loyal to the Union. And everyone did. But then after a couple of months, Grant was like, forget about the swearing thing. Because people just kept breaking it all the time. And at the end of the day, it became just completely irrelevant what anybody said, because all that mattered was their actions. And you can make them swear up and down, yes, I promise to do this and all that kind of stuff. It didn't matter, because even the South viewed the North as foreigners. They called them foreigners. And the problem was that the oath became nothing. It became meaningless, because all that mattered was the actions. And that's what the biblical law always puts the premium, the attention on the actions and never on the words. And I see a big push in the immigration laws to put emphasis on words. We need to vet them first. Without knowing anything about them and their actions, we want to hear them say certain things. And to me, that's ridiculous that we would expect any sort of consistency, because they'll say just whatever you want them to say when you come over here. They'll say I'll say anything. If Russia becomes the greatest country in the world and America says, okay, all white people are illegal, and we're going to start killing white people, right? Because we know that certain people got into power. That's exactly what they'd say. And Russia became the best country in the world. I would say anything to get in there. I would lie my face off to get into Russia. And the premium of biblical law is always on the actions and never on the words. And I don't understand the Christian push to get people to swear or say certain things to a pagan baby murdering state before they come in here. And in fact, on the record, I prefer illegal immigration to legal immigration the way that it is now.
With that thought in mind, I do think it's interesting that there isn't a biblical requirement. Okay, if you want to come into Israel, we understand that most people who weren't born and raised here are going to be having worshipped other gods. It's interesting that there is no biblical requirement to come in and offer a sacrifice and pray to God just the one time, just to get in, and then you're set. There's nothing like that.
No.
Yeah, that's more of a Roman approach, pinch your incense to Caesar, show your loyalty. Seems to be the opposite in biblical law. Any thoughts on that? I want to play one more clip before we wrap up. Nope. All right, let's do this final clip and then we can talk for as long as you guys are willing to stay. So this is going to be the final clip. It's not as long as the first one, but it's longer than that last one. And this is where they do talk about the man who is fleeing Cuba. So I would like to try to bring it back around to the practical, because these are real people. This is happening. Obviously, this is not just ivory tower stuff. I know people personally in my life who came over here, some quote unquote legally, some illegally. I'm sure we all do. So let's listen to this clip and then try to tie this together and deal with this question of, is it a sin to travel into America? So here we go.
Came to the United States. They won a lottery to get out of Cuba, came to the United States, were Christians, and some of our people found them, ministered to them, helped them to kind of get established. They came into the church, and their husband was trying to get out of Cuba, but he was a surgeon, and Castro wasn't letting surgeons out. They wanted to keep the people that were useful to his communist regime, and so he couldn't come out with the same lottery that got his family out. But there were ways that he could try to escape. And so he was trying to escape. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but there were men in our church that helped to facilitate some of that. And he did make it out. And it was harrowing for him to make it out. And once he got here, then, he was able to immediately get asylum, and they're faithful citizens today, no longer here, but they're faithful citizens today. We had other members in our church that had been imprisoned by Castro, for 10, 12 years, sat in prison because they were Christians, and they dared to speak out against the government. So we've got people in our church. We've seen people come into our church, people we've ministered to, that have been converted, having been here illegally, and say, what do I do? And we go to the court system with them. The court system basically says, okay, just wait your turn. And I remember one man who was arrested while he was drunk and put in jail here locally, and through jail ministry, prison ministry, was converted and came out, wanted to join the church. We're talking to him, realized you're from Mexico, you're not here legally. What does it mean now for a Christian? You need to go back to Mexico. Provided a way for him to go back where he had unconverted family and wanted to minister to them. Hard situations. Others where I've sat across the table from those who have been scammed because they didn't have many opportunities to call upon the law to help them, and trying to figure out what to do. And there's some that, I know of people right now who would love to pursue a legal course, but they can't go back to their home country. They can't find legal status in this country. And it's like every door is barred to them. And I've listened to the immigration attorneys. I've listened to the legal authorities say, nothing we can do to help you.
All right, so that was the last clip from the Sword and the Trowel podcast there. So one story there was from a man in Cuba whose family was able to escape Cuba, made it here, but the husband could not, and it was against Cuban law for him to leave. But yet Tom Askell's church says, well, we're going to help you defy that law because ostensibly that law is unjust. It goes back to his previous clip. He's appealing to a higher standard when he says, well, there are some immigration laws that are just and some that are unjust. Well, the elephant in the room is by what standard are you judging whether or not these laws are just or unjust? Then he gives another example of the Mexican who's converted. At that point, from natural principles, here's a guy who's going to be a blessing to your nation, and you kick him back to Mexico. So I'm struggling to see the consistency and the actual standard here of justice when it comes to who should come in and who should not be allowed in. Let's try to tie this together and bring up some disagreements if we still have them on this issue of immigration. So whoever wants to take the floor, go ahead.
I think it's interesting that he was very willing to admit that Castro's desire to retain skilled and highly valuable men was somehow wrong, and that this man deserved to flee his country and go to a better one, which I wouldn't disagree with. But what standard do we have to say that one nation's immigration policy is bad and another's is good? other than the fact that the one that's good is our own country.
Right.
Because
I think that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, wouldn't it be Castro's, as evil and wicked and diabolical as he was, wouldn't it be his prerogative to try and maintain the health of his country by retaining the skilled people rather than letting them go? How do we say, if we just assume the same standard that that Tom Askell's basically using here? How do we point the finger at Castro and say, well, what you were doing was wrong, but what we did was okay?
It sounds like the standard being presented on the Sword and the Trowel is we don't really have to worry about what we say about other countries because we're not
Yeah.
bound by that country's laws. So we can defy them, work directly against them if they're bad, but when it comes to the United States, we can't do that.
Yeah, I
It
think that's a
sounds
good
like the
point.
That's what
reasoning.
it
Unless
sounds
I'm
like.
mistaken, that sounds like the standard that's being applied.
Yeah.
The attention definitely shifts off of well, I should say the biblical microscope, Adam, you're right. I think it shifts from when we look at other countries, we got the biblical microscope on it, and then we look at our own, we're like, well, I got to follow it, kind of a thing. And
Because I'd get in trouble.
because you would get in trouble. Would you say, Adam?
No, yeah, because I can defy Fidel Castro because I won't get in trouble by anybody who can get their hands on me.
Yes, right. Yeah, because it's me. Suddenly, if I defy American, then I'm in trouble. Right. I see what you're saying. And I think it's absolutely wrong to send somebody back to where do you send them to? Back to Mexico?
Yeah.
Back to Mexico. Go back and do it legally. I think that was absolutely an immoral request to make him do that. He's already here. Do you think the government cares? You think they're like care about that? They're like, oh, we missed one. I mean, nobody cares. Absolutely nobody cares that this person came over here illegally. They're a citizen. They're obviously a law-abiding citizen. Nobody cares. The only person who cared in that situation, I submit to you, was Tom Askell. The IC, they don't care. I mean, they got so many people to deal with. What's one extra one that gets away? They just don't care about these kinds of things. And if I was standing there, I'd be like, well, if we don't send this guy back, what's going to happen? What's the worst? Is lightning going to come out and strike him, or any of us? Is God going to like frown upon us? Like, oh, how dare you? He didn't ask the magistrate. I mean, what is going to happen if this guy doesn't go back? And I definitely think that was an immoral request or demand of that church to make this guy go back and be completely arbitrary about how his immigration process is going. I would defend that man. Say, no, do not even set your butt off that pew. You stay right there. You are not going back, brother. You stay right there. Don't worry. The only difference is, that the first 100 years of this nation, there was no immigration process. The only difference now is that the government said it's wrong. That's it. That's the only difference. They said it was legal then, and everyone's fine. And now they say it's illegal now. The only law you're breaking is American code. And you know what? If it becomes legal tomorrow, it's just as arbitrary. Either way, it's an arbitrary law. And I would say, no, absolutely do not go back. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. That's not loving you. You worked hard to get here, so just stay here. That's what I would say. But I think it's absolutely wrong to ask someone, that's putting a burden on someone else that you wouldn't lift a finger to help to do yourself.
Yeah, well, I'd like to go for a few more minutes here if we can. Julio, I'd like you to be able to share some more thoughts here as we near the end here. I would like to point out that I'm going to say a couple things real quick here. I'd like to point out that in studying immigration, I'm not an expert on it, but there's a push and a pull. There's always two reasons why someone would leave one nation and go to another. They're either pushed out of their nation and or they're pulled into the other nation. So the example with Cuba, yeah, he's being pushed out of Cuba because of the communistic regime, but he's not being pulled into Iran. He's not being pulled into Venezuela. He's being pulled to America in this example. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And I would just say, when we talk about pragmatism, that's not my standard, but I will say I do not think it's reasonable or realistic or feasible to prevent immigration. it's not going to happen. I mean, just look at the history of humanity. When someone is, if they're pushed out of a nation, the lengths that people will to go to another nation. I mean, the history of humanity is one of migration and the biblical history as well. The lengths that people will go to, obviously, they will be willing to break the immigration laws. And so what we end up doing is instead of setting the righteous free, as it were, to take dominion, now you and I have to pay for this system where our money is being used to punish people preemptively for traveling, for doing something that they're going to do regardless. And instead of making America a place where we pull in people that want to submit to these laws, we're not dealing with the welfare. We're not dealing with the fact that we don't enforce extant biblical law. We're not doing any of those things. And we're saying, well, if we can just make more laws about immigration, that's going to solve our problem. And I don't think it's biblical nor pragmatic. Julio, your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a little bit more anecdotal, so take it for what it's worth. But there has been, from what I have seen around my little town that I live in, that even though Hispanics are generally Pentecostal in this area, but for the most part, whenever they come to any type of voting issues, they generally tend to vote for whatever is preferential to the tribe, in the sense of what is benefiting the Hispanics. And it's kind of frowned upon to vote against that. And so there is this cultural push, for me specifically, to kind of support anything that is in support of the tribe that my parents are from. And so there is the sense that all this even coming from Bible believing Christians, not necessarily just Pentecostals either, but just in general. And so they would, if there is anything that is preferential to benefiting them as a tribe, that they're advocating 100% for it. Now, there's a couple of exceptions to that, and so I think.
What does it have to do with immigration?
What?
What does it have to do with immigration?
Yeah. So it like in support of any type of like opening up the borders and allowing more Hispanics to come inside to the country. Anything that is so if they want to come into this country and benefit from the welfare state or anything along the lines of that, that's my point, is that these people are coming from an idea that whatever is preferential to their tribe should be implemented into the laws. Therefore, if they're coming inside this country, they're going to do what is best for their own tribe, not necessarily for the own country, and so or for this own country. And so, in I say all of that, but I'm not too. I don't have a strong opinion on the stories, if I'm to be honest, that he was telling us. Because it's a little difficult because he doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of it. So it's kind of hard to understand the contextualness of those stories that he was saying.
Well, I mean, Julio, I mean, people, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Hispanics that have migrated over here. I know many of them personally. And I would do the exact same thing if I was in their shoes. Why would I want to live in some South American country where it's completely backwater when I can come to America and work and provide for my family? Now, if I get what you're saying, the welfare state, but I just don't understand, like, what's more, are we solely talking pragmatic here? And I would say, well, what's more likely to happen, that we get rid of the welfare state or we embrace biblical law? Like, I mean, if that's going to happen, we're going to do both. Like, why are we hanging on to this idea of, well, since we have the welfare state, since we're going to do all these things, we might as well embrace it more and make
Yeah.
more laws. Like you're saying, well, the Hispanics, they're going to vote for the laws that benefit them. Of course they will. And that's Luke's whole point in his book that, yeah, if you embrace a system of humanistic lawmaking, people are going to vote for the laws that benefit them.
At the
The
expense of
solu
other people.
Yeah, the solution is not to make more laws, because now you get the Hispanics are doing a pretty good job of reproducing here, even without the ones coming in. Their birth rate's higher than white people. So
Mhm.
you embrace that model. By that logic, I mean, now it really does become a tribe against tribe thing. And I think this is a rabbit trail, but James Jordan talks about how the myth of the modern Jew, that there is no modern Jew in a biblical sense, and by embracing that idea, we've kind of catered to this mentality that you have this special group of people here, and they're different than these people, as opposed to, look, yeah, there are wonderful cultures all around the world, but we're not going to make that like the standard of justice in our society. America's strength, if we're going to continue to exist and have any benefit to the world, it's going to be because we honor Christ. And that has to be our standard. If we make it, oh, well, we have to prevent the Hispanics from, getting their tribe, and we got to allow the non-Hispanics to push their values, we are going to lose. We're definitely going to lose. One, because we're not going to have God's blessing behind it. But two, now it's just a war of attrition, and I bet the Hispanics will win. I married Hispanics, I don't know where my kids fall in on that.
I married a white.
But I mean, my point is like all that stuff is supposed to be subservient. And don't get me wrong, like I'm all about, this is America. I want people to come here and speak English. I don't want you speaking Spanish here. But the solution to that is not a man-made law that says, hey, you can't speak Spanish. My first solution would be get rid of the laws that say, as a large employer, I have to give you access to, this in the Spanish language. So,
My
um,
counter to that is how can we do that if the majority of people that are coming in are voting even against that of
well,
like anything biblical
yeah.
law?
Well, the problem is most of the people in America are voting against biblical law. And so we're trying to, at least I am trying to step back and say, what should we be promoting? And I think the first thing, and one of Luke's main points is let's not voluntarily say, hey, civil magistrate, why don't you commit injustice? I mean, we could talk about Adam's point that, hey, injustice is happening because of God's judgment. I'll generally agree with that. But I don't want to be there and say, hey, why don't you guys do more injustice? If anything, I want to say, hey, could you please be merciful to me, someone who's trying to be righteous, and allow me to take dominion, right? And if I want to bring, Carlos over from Mexico to mow my lawn or to serve my family as a doctor, don't punish him for doing that, and don't punish me, please. Any other comments towards the end here?
That's well said, and I think the history of the American dream. I think my dad pointed out one time that we've lost the American dream, the original American dream. The American dream now is the if you guys can finish it for me. If I say white picket, you guys just finish with fence, and if I say red sports, you guys say car, right? The red sports car, white picket fence, and the colonial house. That's the modern American dream. Even that's shifting. But it used to not be that. The American dream, what America was offering to the people coming here and the people that lived here was mobility through the classes. Your children, this is what it was. Your children could have it better than you. Yes, yeah, you might not have it great right now, and you might come here, you might not know the language, you might live in a ghetto, but guess what? Since your children know the language, they can have it better than me. There's a future for them. And for the children and children's children, they can have it better. That used to be the American dream. It's not that anymore. Now we kill our children. But the American dream used to be my children can have it better than me, right? And on the Statue of Liberty, there's the plaque right there. It was assumed that we were going to get the worst people. And we were confident in our culture enough that the worst people could come here and we could transform them into the best people. one of the complaints of the colonists was that the British were dumping their worst people in the colonies in the first 100 year, or I forget the time period, but I think it was from 1700 to like 1775, the Brits dumped 20,000 of their worst people. Rather than giving them a sentence, they brought them over here and just dumped them in America. The children of those convicts turned around and fought the British off. America was a wealth-producing machine, and we were so confident in our culture, we would ask for the worst people, right? Give me your tired, your poor, your ruddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door, right? That was on the Statue of Liberty. It was assumed that we were going to get the worst people, and we were so confident in our culture that we're like, you know what? You give us the worst, and we're going to produce the best. Give us the worst people, and we're going to turn them right around, because our culture was able to do that. Our culture was Christian enough that we were able to do that. I think our culture can still do that if we reject statist, wicked laws and embrace God's law. It's part of the Christian ethos, right?
Well,
We take a worst symbol of death and destruction, the cross, and now it's a sign of hope, right? That's standard for any Christian country, to take the worst people and turn them into the best people. It was assumed that we would get the worst, and now that's gone. And so, I in my opinion, to be truly American in the faith and the spirit of American of the history of America, is to be against the immigration system that we have now, by making people answer questions and refusing, these horrible people that come over. We were confident enough that, yeah, who cares if they're the worst people? We can turn them right around and make them into the best people, and we did. And I think that is the sign of a Christian nation, and that was what happened at Geneva. They took the worst people and then turned them into productive people. And I think that's the sign of a great, godly Christian nation, is that we take the worst people and we turn them into the best people.
I think it
Well,
is
and I
very
think that
telling
this-
that our. Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead, Adam.
Josiah.
Okay. I think that this is not a new issue. This isn't a problem that we're suddenly happening upon. There have been linguistic barriers. There have been cultural barriers. There have been all kinds of hurdles with immigration in the past. This isn't a new issue. But what was different, to Luke's point and what he's talking about, what was different is there was incentives to come to a country and to build and to create, to start businesses, to start families. Yeah, there might have been linguistic hurdles, but their children spoke the language. Their grandchildren were fully assimilated. So we need to make sure that we're thinking of not just a here and now solution, but a generational solution where people can come with. There were German immigrants, there were Italian immigrants, there were Scandinavian immigrants, there all sorts of people came to America for the chance at a better life. And because there wasn't a welfare state, because there wasn't a free ride, they were forced to do the hard work. And those are the people we actually want here. The problem is now, with our current culture, we've disincentivized the work. We've disincentivized the need for making sure that your kids speak the language so that they can get a job.
And what I don't
We've
understand,
removed all of
Josiah, what I don't understand is the unified Christian voice at trying to stop people from coming in, rather than focusing on the real problem of welfare.
Yeah.
Most Christians will say that the bigger problem is the open border before they'll say welfare is the problem. Well, I don't get that. I don't understand. It makes no sense to me. Why would we focus on the border when we should be trying all of our efforts every time we open our mouth? What about welfare?
Yeah.
And the politician, we don't want Trump. What person has approached Trump and said, "Hey, Trump, can you get rid of welfare?" But no, we celebrate when he sends the army to the border. This doesn't make sense to me.
There's a reason they call the welfare state, that's the third rail. You know what the third rail is referring to. On a subway, you've got two rails to ride on, and the rail up top is power. If you touch that, you die. It's political suicide to talk about cutting welfare. You have to expand it or keep it the same at the very minimum. And so in that sense, I don't think the immigration problem is going to go away. When I talk to people, they're like, yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about that. If you get rid of the welfare state and there weren't free stuff attracting lazy people, I would have a whole lot less problem with open borders.
even our prisons are better than some of these countries. So these people are thinking, if I can just get across the border and get arrested, it's still better than where I'm at.
Oh my word, that's sad but true.
Another reason to abolish the prison system, less
Yes.
migrants.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think just using the home analogy. I mean, it's kind of like if I set up my home and I'm like, hey, if you somehow make it onto this property, I'm gonna feed you 3 meals a day. You're gonna get lodging, but don't you dare come on this property. I'm gonna do everything I can to keep you off this property. Once you make it, you're getting all these benefits. It's insane to me to try to solve that problem without the other one. Well, Luke, I don't know if I've ever been more proud to be an American after hearing your rousing speech there of of the American spirit. But that is what every nation should want. They should want to be a light to the world, and they should have confidence in their culture. And that's the thing. I hear the Christian nationalists talk a lot about culture, and I think, with all due respect, they're presenting a weak culture that cannot deal with people that come over to the nation. If you have a strong culture, we can deal with the evil people. We'll be attracting fewer of them. That would be one of the first signs of a strong culture. But when they come, we will be able to deal with them. So, all right. Any final thoughts? Julio, I'll let you have a final thought if you have one, and we'll wrap this up.
Before that, if I may, I was going to say, in agreement with what Luke was saying about the plaque on the Statue of Liberty, I think it's very telling, basically by putting up restrictions to coming to the country, is saying that we're actually in such disrepair right now, we can't handle problem people. And so, in that sense, not having restrictions basically is a sort of a beating your chest move. Like, give us your worst. We'll handle it. We don't have to look at it. Now, if they're really, really bad, we might end up having to kill them. So we'll handle it one way or another. But
Fair enough.
if they're willing to work with us, then we can handle it. Versus now, we don't govern ourselves particularly well. And now you're going to add to the pile other people who need to assimilate and learn the culture and learn the language, all that stuff. We're already overwhelmed. It's like, somebody who did a really bad job and has 10 children, and their kids are all wrecks and nightmares, and now you say, okay, I need you to adopt 5 more children that don't speak the language. Oh, and by the way, they're all over 20 years old, and you got to adopt all of them. That's a really big ask. And so, practically speaking, I think that's where the bucking against open borders is coming from, because we're overwhelmed. Well, that's just saying our courts stink.
Yeah, well,
That's not
yeah,
saying that this is the way that it should be.
yeah, and we're overwhelmed. If you look at it from a biblical perspective, we're overwhelmed because we've cast God's law behind our back. I mean, never before, I think, generally speaking, would we say, have we had such military might and power, but that's still not giving us what we seek. It's not giving us peace and prosperity. We have all this power, we have all this technology, we have more laws than ever, but yet we still don't have the peace and prosperity. Why? Because God said, don't seek your satisfaction, your security in those things. You can have an army, you can defend yourself, but if you cast my law behind your back, it doesn't matter how many chariots you have, you're going to crumble from without or from within. And so that's what's happening now. We've abandoned the solution and the path to peace and prosperity, which is faithfulness. And instead of repenting and saying, you know what, we've put our hope in these things and we need to go back to biblical law, we're saying, well, let's just do more of what got us here and hope that somehow that'll help us.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
I
Let's trust in our walls harder.
and I just want to add to this, talking about what you said there, Chris. The solution, I just want to put this out there. The solution is not to open the borders to our problems in America. That's not the solution, to open the border. That's not the solution. That's not going to solve anything. Okay, if we open the border, it will stop what I believe is injustice right now. But that's not going to be the gateway or the answer to the problems that we're facing. The problems that we're facing, I believe, specifically, is the Christian church asking our magistrates to do injustice. That's the problem. When the magistrate looks at the Christian church and says, "What do you want me to do?" Our repeated reply to him is, "We want more injustice. We want you to do what you're not supposed to be doing."
The voice from the church, unified, must be to the magistrate, just as it was to the Pope. You cannot be legislating new sins. Every papal bull that you issue, it's like a new rule here and a new rule there. That's not your responsibility. The church eventually rejected that and moved on to Protestantism. They said, no more. We need to do the same thing with the magistrate. You need to stop legislating new crimes. You need to stop putting your nose where it doesn't belong. Your responsibility is to give us justice. Praise those who do good and punish those who do evil according to what God's law says. That's your responsibility. But the Christian church, time and again, unified. When the magistrate says, what do you want me to do? The Christian church is always more injustice. That's what we want. We want you to do more injustice. Never, in all of Trump's campaigning and rallies, how often did you hear the word justice? Even from the church. That's the only responsibility of the magistrate, is to give us justice. But that's the last thing that the Christian church wants from the magistrate, because I think we're bought too. We are in bed with the idolatry.
It's sort of like you've got a parent who walks in the room and two kids are fighting over a toy. If the parent's overwhelmed, he's going to say, okay, nobody gets to play with that anymore, as long as it makes the fighting stop. The church's response is, oh, that's the way that it should be. Nobody should get this toy. Rather than, if we behave ourselves, I'd like to earn the right to have my rights back, please. But rather than that, all we do is say, yep, my parent has the right to do that if he wants. Well, what if the parent weren't overwhelmed anymore? It's like we can't think far ahead enough to ask that question.
Well, these are the discussions we want to have and the conversations we want to have. The Apostle Paul told the Corinthians, don't you know that we shall judge angels? And are we not able to determine these trivial matters on earth? So if the Christians can't figure this out, and if we keep turning to the pagans to solve problems, we should not be surprised if we continue to have more problems. Julio, I wanted to give you any final word. Did we move the needle at all on you? It seemed like we were trying to convince you a little bit there.
Yeah. I'm still in the position of where I'm at. I think those in authority we have given, whether rightfully or unrightfully so, whether they've taken it or been given it to them, they will be judged according to how they governed us, which I'm certain all of you would agree as well. The only departure that I would make is that I would believe that they have a due diligence to make sure that the governing people, that the people they're governing over, is taken care of. And so the big thing is that one of the ways that I would view it is the protection of people who are disproportionately committing crime against the people in the United States. And so that's kind of the big thing for me. But yes, I would say no, the needle has not been moved.
All right. Well, I will say, Julio,
Respectfully.
if any of your family, do you have some family overseas, perhaps?
Yes, but none of them never met.
Okay. Well, if any of them do want to move to America and they come here, I will not report them to the authorities. So I just want you to know that, even though you disagree here, I will not report them to the authorities for crossing the border. All right. Anybody else have any final comments?
Thanks for
All right.
having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming to all four of you again. Check out Adam. Adam has a podcast. Theocracy is the name of the podcast. Check out Adam's podcast. Of course, Luke has a podcast, Think and Reform. You can find information about that on futureofchristendom.org. Josiah has written an article. I think I gotta get some more of his stuff up there as well. So go to futureofchristendom.org, find some more information about what we're doing here in Pennsylvania. I hope we can have Adam, Josiah, and Julio back on again. If any of you want to come back on to further discuss this further, let me know. I want to thank you all for listening to this episode and liking and sharing and subscribing. If you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/TheLancasterPatriot. Until next time, remember that Christ, not man, is king. So long, and God bless.